On January 27th, 2020, in Colorado Springs, Colorado, 11-year-old Gannon Stauch told his stepmother he had a stomach ache and stayed home from school. By evening, she would report him missing to police. What happened in those crucial hours between would horrify a nation and expose the monster hiding behind a caring stepmother's facade. Dramatic pause, music swell. This is Shadows by Barry, and I'm your host. Tonight, we dive deep into one of the most heartbreaking cases of family betrayal I've ever covered. Before we begin, I need to warn you. This case involves violence against a child, and the details are deeply disturbing. If you're not prepared for that content, please consider watching one of our other episodes instead. For those staying with us, please hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Your support helps us bring justice to victims like Gannon by ensuring their stories are never forgotten. This is Gannon's story, and how justice finally found him, even when it came from the most unexpected place. Let me tell you about Gannon Jacob Stauch. Born on September 29, 2008, in South Carolina, Gannon came into this world fighting. At just 1 pound, 6 ounces, he was born premature, what his parents would lovingly call their miracle child. From those first fragile moments, Gannon showed the strength and spirit that would define his short but beautiful life. Those who knew Gannon described him as having the heart and spirit of an old man, wise beyond his years, with an infectious smile that could light up any room. He was the kind of kid who would do anything for anyone, always putting others before himself. His little sister would later say he was simply the nicest person she knew, her only brother, and her favorite brother. At 11 years old, Gannon loved video games, spending time with friends, and most importantly, he adored his family. He lived with his father, Albert Stauch, a dedicated National Guard member, in Colorado Springs. His biological mother, Landon Hyatt, lived in South Carolina, but despite the distance, their bond remained unbreakable. Gannon was thriving. He was doing well in school, had close friendships, and seemed to have adapted well to his parents' separation. He was, by all accounts, a normal, happy kid with his whole life ahead of him. A kid who trusted the adults in his life to protect him. If you believe every child deserves that protection, please take a moment to like this video. It helps us reach more people with these important stories. In 2018, Albert Stauch remarried. His new wife was Letecia Stauch, a woman who would soon become Gannon's stepmother. On the surface, she seemed to fit perfectly into their family dynamic. Letecia was a teacher, someone society expects to nurture and protect children. She appeared caring, involved, and committed to making their blended family work. But blended families come with unique challenges. There are new relationships to navigate, boundaries to establish, and trust to build. For a child like Gannon, who already dealt with living between 2 homes and 2 parents, adding a step-parent to the mix required even more adjustment. Initially, things seemed to go well. There were family photos showing Letecia and Gannon smiling together. To the outside world, they looked like any other modern American family making it work. Albert was frequently deployed with the National Guard, which meant Letecia often found herself as Gannon's primary caregiver during those periods. But behind closed doors, something far more sinister was developing. Evidence would later reveal that Letecia had been harboring dark feelings toward her stepson, feelings so twisted that she had actually Googled the phrase, "I hate my stepson." Think about that for a moment. This is a grown woman, entrusted with the care of an innocent child, searching online about hating that very child. What kind of person does that? What was going through her mind during those searches? The family was also dealing with financial pressures and marital discord. Albert's military deployments put strain on their relationship, and there were growing tensions that neighbors and family members were beginning to notice. Some would later say they saw warning signs, small behavioral changes that, in hindsight, pointed to something much darker brewing beneath the surface. But no one, absolutely no one, could have predicted what was about to happen. Let's talk about Letecia Stauch's background. because understanding who she was helps us understand how this tragedy unfolded. Letecia had worked as a teacher, a profession that requires background checks, training in child development, and a commitment to children's welfare. On paper, she seemed like someone you'd trust with your child. But just weeks before Gannon's murder, Letecia had been diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder. She was receiving treatment at a military health clinic, where she was referred to a psychologist. Her therapist, Rhonda Niederhauser, would later testify that Letecia didn't show signs of being a threat to herself or others, and appeared aware of her surroundings during their sessions. Yet something was clearly wrong. Family members and neighbors began noticing changes in Letecia's behavior. She seemed increasingly agitated, especially when Albert was away on deployment. These deployments meant she was alone with Gannon for extended periods, a responsibility that appeared to weigh heavily on her. What makes this case so particularly disturbing is how calculated everything that followed would prove to be. This wasn't a crime of passion or a moment of mental breakdown. The evidence would show deliberate planning, methodical cleanup, and elaborate deception that went on for weeks. Albert Stauch was a devoted father who trusted his wife to care for his son. Gannon was an innocent child who trusted his stepmother to protect him. The community trusted Letecia as an educator and mother figure. That trust was about to be shattered in the most horrific way imaginable. January 27th, 2020 started like any other Monday. Albert was away on military duty. Gannon woke up not feeling well, a simple stomach ache that any parent or caregiver deals with regularly. It was a kind of minor childhood illness that usually means a quiet day at home, maybe some soup, some rest, and feeling better by evening. But by nightfall, a massive search would be underway. A community would rally together in desperate hope, and the woman who reported Gannon missing would become the primary suspect in his murder. Monday, January 27th, 2020. Albert Stauch was away on National Guard duty, leaving Gannon in the care of his stepmother, Letecia. That morning, Gannon told Letecia he wasn't feeling well. He had a stomach ache and didn't want to go to school. It's a conversation that happens in households across America every day. A child feels sick, a parent makes a decision to keep them home, and usually that's the end of it. Letecia called the school to report Gannon's absence. To anyone listening, she sounded like a caring stepmother doing exactly what she should do. But what happened next would prove that appearances can be devastatingly deceiving. Here's where the timeline becomes crucial, because every minute of this day would later be scrutinized by investigators, and what they discovered would shock everyone involved in the case. At approximately 10:15 that morning, surveillance cameras from a neighbor's home captured Letecia's red pickup truck, leaving the family's residence in the Lorson Ranch neighborhood. In that footage, you can see Gannon getting into the vehicle with his stepmother. He was alive, moving normally, just a kid going somewhere with his stepmom. But here's the chilling part. When that same truck returned at around 2:19 in the afternoon, investigators believe Gannon never got out. The surveillance shows Letecia exiting the vehicle alone, but there's no sign of Gannon. What happened during those approximately 4 hours? Where did Letecia take Gannon? What occurred in that truck, or wherever they went that meant an 11-year-old boy who left home alive would never return? The official timeline that Letecia would give police was completely different from what the surveillance footage showed. According to her story, Gannon had stayed home sick all day, and then left the house between 3:15 and 4:15 that afternoon to walk to a friend's house to play. She claimed he should have been back within an hour, and when he didn't return, she began to worry. At 6:55 p.m. on January 27th, Letecia Stauch called the El Paso County Sheriff's Office to report her stepson missing. She told the dispatcher that 11-year-old Gannon had left home around 3:15 to visit friends but hadn't returned. She said she had looked around the neighborhood and asked neighbors, but no one had seen him. Initially, Gannon was classified as a juvenile runaway and entered into state and national databases at 7:32 p.m. But this classification wouldn't last long. Investigators would quickly realize they were dealing with something far more serious. Around 10 p.m., deputies arrived at the Stauch home on Mandan Drive. They spoke with Letecia, who seemed cooperative, allowing them to search the house and garage. But even in those first hours, something felt off to the responding officers. When deputies asked which friend Gannon had gone to visit and where they lived, Letecia's response was troubling. She didn't know. She told police she didn't really keep track of his friends or their addresses. For many parents, this might seem unusual, but not necessarily suspicious. However, combined with other inconsistencies in her story, it raised red flags. Within just 3 days, on January 30th, the case was reclassified from runaway to missing endangered person. This change indicated that investigators had found new information and evidence that suggested Gannon was in serious danger. The search effort that followed was massive and heartbreaking. The FBI Child Abduction Rapid Deployment Team was activated. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children joined the effort. Local law enforcement search and rescue teams and hundreds of community volunteers worked tirelessly, using drones, search dogs, horses, helicopters, and divers to comb through every possible area where Gannon might be found. The community response was overwhelming. Neighbors who had never met the Stauch family joined search efforts. Local businesses donated food and supplies. Social media campaigns spread Gannon's photo far and wide. Everyone wanted to bring this little boy home safely. But as the community searched desperately for Gannon, investigators were beginning to focus their attention on the one person who should have been helping them the most, his stepmother, Letecia. As the investigation progressed, Letecia's story began to change and evolve in ways that deeply concerned investigators. What started as a simple report of a child going to play at a friend's house became an increasingly complex web of lies and contradictions. In interviews with detectives, Letecia provided different versions of events. She changed details about timing, about what Gannon was wearing, about his demeanor that day, and about her own activities. Each time investigators pressed for clarification, her story shifted. But the most disturbing development came when Letecia began accusing others of being involved in Gannon's disappearance. In phone calls with her husband Albert, calls that the FBI was secretly recording with his cooperation, Letecia spun an elaborate tale of home invasion, rape, and kidnapping. According to this new version of events, a man had broken into their home, sexually assaulted her, and then beaten and kidnapped Gannon. When Albert pressed for details, asking logical questions like where the evidence of this violent crime was, Letecia's responses became even more suspicious. Albert later testified about one of these conversations, recounting how he asked her, "Where's the bloody mess, the clothes, the rags?" Her response was chilling in its simplicity. "Well, I disposed of it." Think about that statement. If someone had truly broken into your home, violently assaulted you, and kidnapped your stepchild, would your first instinct be to clean up evidence? Would you dispose of anything that might help police find the perpetrator and rescue the child? The answer is obvious. No rational person would do that. Meanwhile, forensic teams were finding evidence that contradicted every version of Letecia's story. Blood evidence was discovered in the home despite obvious attempts to clean it up. The patterns and locations of this evidence told a very different story than the one Letecia was telling. By February 1st, just 5 days after reporting Gannon missing, Letecia made a decision that would seal her fate in the eyes of investigators. She loaded her belongings into a rented cargo van and left Colorado with her 17-year-old daughter, claiming she needed to start over somewhere else. Her half-brother, Dakota Lowry, would later provide crucial testimony about helping Letecia load that van. He described struggling with an unusually heavy suitcase, one that Letecia was very particular about handling herself. At the time, he thought it was odd but didn't question it. Later, that detail would take on horrific significance. As Letecia fled across the country, investigators continued gathering evidence. Every piece they found pointed to the same devastating conclusion. Gannon hadn't been kidnapped by a stranger. He had been murdered by the very person who was supposed to protect him. On March 2nd, 2020, more than a month after Gannon's disappearance, law enforcement finally had enough evidence to act. Letecia Stauch was arrested in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, by local police and FBI agents. She was charged with first-degree murder of a child under 12 by a person in a position of trust, child abuse resulting in death, tampering with a deceased human body, and tampering with physical evidence. Even during her arrest and transport back to Colorado, Letecia's behavior continued to be deeply disturbing. On March 4th, while being transported by law enforcement, she attacked a deputy with a Monster Energy drink and attempted to grab the officer's firearm. This violent outburst gave investigators yet another glimpse into the dangerous person they were dealing with. But the breakthrough that would bring devastating closure to the case came on March 17, 2020. A maintenance worker in Pace, Florida, was conducting routine inspections under the Escambia Bay Bridge when he made a horrific discovery. Hidden beneath the bridge structure was a suitcase, the same heavy suitcase that Dakota Lowry had helped Letecia load into her van weeks earlier. Inside that suitcase were the remains of 11-year-old Gannon Stauch, more than 1,300 miles away from his home in Colorado Springs. The autopsy results revealed the true brutality of what Letecia had done to this innocent child. Gannon had been stabbed 18 times. He had been struck in the head with a blunt object, and he had been shot once with a handgun. The medical examiner determined that any one of these injuries could have been fatal, meaning Letecia had inflicted multiple lethal wounds on a child who was completely defenseless against her attack. Think about the level of violence this represents. This wasn't a momentary loss of control or a single blow in anger. This was sustained, deliberate violence against an 11-year-old boy, 18 stab wounds, multiple blunt force injuries to his head, a gunshot wound. Each action was a choice Letecia made to continue hurting this child. The crime scene analysis revealed that Gannon had been killed in his own bedroom, the one place where any child should feel completely safe. After murdering him, Letecia had carefully cleaned the crime scene, hidden his body, and then spent weeks lying to everyone who was desperately trying to find him. The community that had searched so tirelessly for Gannon was devastated by this news. The volunteers who had spent countless hours combing through forests and fields, the neighbors who had distributed flyers, the strangers who had shared his photo on social media. They all had to confront the horrible reality that while they were searching for a missing child, his body had been disposed of like garbage more than 1,000 miles away. Letecia Stauch's trial began in April 2023, more than 3 years after Gannon's murder. She pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity, claiming she suffered from dissociative identity disorder due to childhood sexual abuse. Her defense team argued that she had experienced a mental break during the killing and couldn't be held criminally responsible for her actions. The defense brought in Dr. Dorothy Lewis, a controversial psychiatrist who specializes in dissociative identity disorder. Dr. Lewis concluded that Letecia had multiple personalities as a result of trauma and was legally insane at the time of the murder. But the prosecution painted a very different picture. They argued that Letecia killed Gannon because she hated him and wanted to hurt his father, Albert, whom she planned to leave. The evidence they presented was overwhelming and damning. Remember those Google searches I mentioned earlier? Prosecutors submitted evidence showing that Letecia had searched for "I hate my stepson" online. They also presented evidence of her elaborate planning, her systematic cleanup of the crime scene, and her weeks-long campaign of deception following the murder. State mental health experts who examined Letecia came to a very different conclusion than the defense's psychiatrist. They determined that while she had a personality disorder with borderline and narcissistic features, she was legally sane at the time she killed Gannon. Under Colorado law, this means she understood the difference between right and wrong and was capable of forming the intent to commit a crime. The prosecution's case was methodical and devastating. They showed how Letecia had carefully planned the murder, how she had tried to cover up, and how she had continued lying even as hundreds of people searched desperately for Gannon. Every action she took after the murder showed consciousness of guilt and an understanding that what she had done was wrong. Albert Stauch testified during the trial, describing his growing suspicions about his wife and his cooperation with the FBI in recording their phone conversations. His testimony was heartbreaking. A father who had trusted his wife to care for his son, only to discover that she had murdered him. The trial lasted 5 weeks, with prosecutors presenting a mountain of evidence, including forensic analysis, surveillance footage, digital records, and testimony from numerous witnesses. The defense presented only one witness, Dr. Lewis, and her controversial diagnosis. On May 8, 2023, after deliberating for several hours, the jury reached their verdict. They rejected Letecia's insanity defense completely and found her guilty on all charges. The judge in Letecia Stauch's case was Gregory Werner of Colorado's 4th Judicial District. During sentencing, Judge Werner made a statement that captured the horror of what Letecia had done. He called it the most horrific case I have ever seen. And this is from a judge who presided over countless criminal cases throughout his career. Letecia Stauch was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Not once, but twice. She received 1 life sentence for first-degree murder and another for the murder of a child under 12 by a person in a position of trust. Additionally, she was sentenced to 12 years for tampering with a deceased human body and 18 months for tampering with evidence. These sentences will run concurrently, meaning Letecia will spend the rest of her life behind bars with no possibility of ever being released. She will never again have the opportunity to harm another child. In September 2020, 7 months after his murder, Gannon was finally laid to rest in his home state of South Carolina. His funeral was a celebration of his life. The bright, loving child who had touched so many hearts in his short time on earth. His mother spoke about his beautiful smile and his generous spirit. His little sister shared memories of her nicest brother, who would do anything for anyone. The impact of this case extended far beyond the courtroom. It reminded us all of the vulnerability of children and the absolute trust they place in the adults responsible for their care. It showed us how a community can come together in crisis, with hundreds of strangers joining the search for a missing child. And it demonstrated that even in the darkest cases, justice can still prevail. For Albert Stauch and Landon Hyatt, Gannon's parents, no verdict could ever bring their son back or heal the wounds left by his loss. But knowing that his killer will never hurt another child provides some measure of justice for their beautiful boy. Today, Letecia Stauch is serving her sentence at the Colorado Department of Corrections. Gannon's memory lives on through the people who loved him and the community that never gave up searching for him. His story serves as both a heartbreaking reminder of evil that can hide behind familiar faces and a testament to the power of love, community, and justice. If this case has affected you, please take a moment to like and share this video. Every share helps ensure that victims like Gannon are never forgotten. Subscribe to Shadows by Barry for more true crime content that honors victims and seeks justice for those who can no longer speak for themselves. Thank you for listening to Gannon's story. Until next time, stay safe. And remember, sometimes the greatest danger comes from those closest to us.